This video might save you a ton of time if you are currently customizing your buttons and menus for the C70, because I have gone through many iterations myself, and last year I gave them away to viewers for free, but since then, I've noticed a handful of things that are definitely not ideal. So here is my new and improved CMF file version 2. If you're new here, my name is Eric, and I am a cinematographer based out of Boston. The first change I made was number 3, peaking. I changed it from all, which includes both your LCD and the HDMI feed, to LCD only. I constantly had clients asking me why their monitor was all red. And not only was it just a waste of time to explain what peaking was, it was also just a much worse experience for them. Zebras is the same story, changed to LCD only. I often use Zebras for exposing skin, and if you load in the CMF file, not only the buttons will change, but also my exact IRE ranges for my Zebra settings will be loaded as well. If you're interested in learning more about this technique, check out my C-Log2 exposure guide video. I'll link up there somewhere. Number 8 was magnification. Because the C70's peaking is so good, I never really found myself punching in to get critical focus. When I initially set up this camera, I programmed it there because I was accustomed on my older, crappier cameras to needing to punch in to get critical focus because I didn't have peaking. But with the C70s, the peaking is so good, even when fully zoomed out, I can very clearly tell what is and what is not in focus. And I decided to set it to a button that I actually already have somewhere else in the camera because it's so important to me, it's worth having in 2 places, and that is autofocus lock. I find 8 to be a much more ergonomic place to find and toggle autofocus, especially if I have the camera rigged up at all and the front of the body isn't super accessible with rails or a follow focus. So without jostling the camera, I can seamlessly tap it on and off. As we all know, the C70's autofocus is a bit spotty. If it starts to hunt, I can just snap it back to manual and dial it in seamlessly, no matter where my hands are placed, which I do with the help of the focus guide, which is always enabled when in manual focus in my settings. My favorite thing about this feature, besides the fact that it tells you which direction to go in, is that it still follows faces and eyes when face tracking is enabled, even if autofocus is off, and therefore you can always manually keep your subject's eye crisp. And the other autofocus related button on the front is slightly changed as well. I realized that I pretty much never turned face tracking off, and the autofocus is definitely smart enough in whole area mode to focus on objects when there is no face. So there's really no downside to face tracking. Worst case scenario, you have a person's face in frame, but you rather focus on what's in their hand. In whole area mode, you simply have to tap that object and the camera will start tracking that instead. Even in face only mode, your tap will override the face tracking. So that button is now changed to face AF, which is what allows you to toggle between face only and face priority, because both are useful. Face only is great because if a subject leaves a frame, you can avoid that artificial looking rack to the back where the camera hunts as soon as they lose a face, and that's great for interviews. However, I'm personally mostly using face priority because I find it more helpful to have the camera focus on whatever is prominent in frame, whether or not it's a face, without requiring me to tap on that object if it is not a face. This is my most recent addition, so I'm not 100% sure if it'll stay that way forever on my camera, but that's my thought process. Now, if you are to load the CMF file, not only will you get the buttons, but you will also get all of my menu settings. These are the types of things you usually only change once, and then they will impact you every time you shoot. Audio monitoring, which is what you hear in your headphones and what you visually see on the LCD, was by default set to channels 1 and 2. And that is what it was in my initial CMF file. However, if I'm using 2 audio inputs like a boom and a lav, channel 1 will be the boom, channel 2 will be the safety of the boom, and channels 3 and 4 will be the lavs. And I don't really have any need to monitor the safety track of the boom, so now by monitoring channels 1 and 3, I can also keep an ear on the lav and see if it's rustling on clothing or fell out of place, while also monitoring the gain on the boom. I could even single out each audio source by switching my headphones from the left to right channel. Next change, tally lamp is turned off. This is far better for documentaries and any type of interview shooting when you don't want to further intimidate your subject. I mentioned this in my C70 hidden documentary features video, and if you're interested in the rest of those features, I'll link a card up there. On-screen record standby button is enabled. I'm not sure if I had this turned on in my old CMF file or not, but I definitely haven't called it out in a video before. You can record simply by tapping the LCD screen. So those are all of the changes I made inside the menu. But now we're going to move on to the My Menus pages. These are the user buildable menus that allow you to consolidate all of your important settings that you might want to change occasionally without requiring you to remember where in the menus these settings are and dig through everything. Last time they just were not super well thought out. Somehow I didn't have formatting cards in my menus last time, so now I have initialized media for both slot A and slot B. And I added stop motion and time-lapse modes because I'm super excited to play with them. I haven't had time yet, but those are exciting new features that Canon just added with the most recent firmware update, and I'm super stoked to have them. Page 2 is all audio stuff. Page 3 is stuff that I also think is important. I'm all about changing up my aspect ratios. I can both try out new aspect ratios and dial in my monitoring opacity. Grid markers if I need to center something. View assist for HDMI, a much needed firmware addition. But if you're shooting with a very specific LUT that's not Canon's built-in LUT and you want to monitor that on a different display, then you can toggle it off in these menus and load that LUT onto that other monitor. I have the back scroll wheel disabled because I never really change my ISO. I'm basically always shooting at the native if possible, and it was far too easy to accidentally bump. I very recently realized though, even if it is disabled for shooting, it still works in the menu pages. And it's actually a super efficient way to jump to faraway settings. I can't believe I used to rotate that dial around and around and around and around and around and around to get to different pages in the menu. That was kind of silly, because with this small scroll wheel, you can jump entire tabs. And lastly, but importantly, headphone volume. On more than one occasion, I was filming an interview where we started filming and then I realized that the headphone volume was so high that it kinda hurt, and I didn't want to risk shaking the camera by digging through the menus to find the headphone volume, so I just kinda lived with it. But now I can easily dial that in to a comfortable monitoring level. If you do decide to load my particular CMF file, make sure to use the entire folder structure, not just the CMF file, and load it onto slot B on your camera. A will not work, and in my experience, 128 gigabyte cards will also not work. I've even had problems with 64 gig cards, so try 32 or smaller. Just find register in the menu and you should be all good. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Bye.